When discussing Starfleet Security, it's a really interesting affair. While Starfleet Security has rarely been top of the line through most of the eras, they have generally been pretty competent. I think it's very telling that the Starfleet Security personnel that are basically idiots that are remembered are from when Gene Roddenberry had ultimate control of Star Trek. When it wasn't under the writing purview of anyone else, it was anything that he said goes. Most of Starfleet Security that comes to mind is generally the first and second seasons of The Next Generation, unless you're talking about them getting killed, and then it's obviously the original series, but that's a conversation for another time. As stated, this is the true Roddenberry era, and it's not surprising that it's also the era of the Golden Age when Starfleet, and by extension Starfleet Security, had become largely idiotic, largely pacifistic. Let's just get into it.
I think you should know that there is no physical training anywhere that matches Starfleet, especially its security people.
Starfleet Security was, at least according to the officers within it, one of the most well-trained security forces in the galaxy. Certainly this would be true when these men and women went up against governmental bodies that had just barely entered onto the galactic stage, but when it came to even minor powers that had been around for a while, like that of the Cardassian Alliance or the Tellarian Republic, Starfleet Security showed how its training got a lot of people killed. And the ironic thing is that it didn't have to. As I stated before, the department that was supposed to protect everybody was much more competent during the 22nd century, 23rd century, and post-Dominion War. I'm not saying they were perfect by any stretch, but they were at least a lot better than what we've observed in the mid-24th century. In fact, in my opinion, the security forces that existed before the Federation of the United Earth, Andorian Empire, and the Vulcan High Command were infinitely better than the era of Picard. Now that would change post-Dominion War, and again we can talk about that later, but the question is, why was this? Why were they so lackluster? Why couldn't they defend their own ships and installations? I believe that there are two real answers to this question. As I stated, the individual militaries of the founding members of the Federation were top-notch, some of the best that existed, and they would combine these forces to defeat the Romulan Star Empire. And after that, the Vulcans, Humans, Tellarites, and Andorians founded the Federation, a multi-governmental entity that strived for common defense, peace, and scientific exploration. But that's where it all went wrong, because when you think about it, you took two of the most powerful governments within the Alpha Quadrant, paired them with two moderately powerful nations in the Alpha Quadrant, and then let them combine their technology. This is the first reason that Starfleet Security would become so inept. The need for adequate security personnel was unnecessary. Starfleet Security would find themselves on well-defended vessels, starbases, and other installations that had phasers of epic proportions and shielding. Not to mention technology where you could instantly transport someone from one area to another. So, ultimately, they became little more than mall cops, especially when you start seeing ships like the Galaxy class. Attacks that could threaten Starfleet interests would be so rare that the need to effectively train personnel is just unnecessary. Of course, the Q showed why this would be a flawed way of thinking about things and that you would need to train for superior enemies, but it's logical that a widely perceived era of peace due to your megadeth weapons would result in stagnation when it comes to training your forces. However, this isn't the only reason that Starfleet Security, well, it sucked.
Starfleet is not a military organization. Its purpose is exploration.
Because again, think about it. Starfleet Security had the training of hundreds of planetary governments, but they could be destroyed by a small Mako team. And I think one of the problems that, when paired with advanced technology, create this problem is that of the Federation policy and propaganda. A long time ago, there was someone who commented on my channel, and honestly, I forget exactly what they said or who they were. I looked for it but couldn't find them, but they said something akin to, some nations became so good at war that they had to forget how to do it. Whether you agree with the statement or not, I do feel like it was probably the motto of the Federation. The government ultimately decided that they wanted to be better than the sum of their individual nation-states. Thanks to this, we know that when the Federation's Starfleet formed, they would only invite certain Mako captains and not others. Now certainly there were warriors, you had Captain Kirk as an example, but I think that he was probably more an exception to the rule than the rule itself. It's my opinion that those who were far more likely to be pacifistic were chosen, especially when we get into the 24th century. Due to both of these aspects, the foundation would be laid, and ultimately, the people who were to protect those they cared most for would start to not only lose the training that they needed, but believe that they really weren't required. After all, combat is a small purview of what a ship and its captain really does.
I think it's a waste of effort to test our combat skills. It's a minor province in the makeup of a starship captain.
And there would never ever be any examples of why they would need a strong security element to defend everyone. I may at some point go a little bit further into this, like how I would, change Starfleet Security to make it more apt, and I think that's going to be a great video when I do it, but for now I'd love your opinions. What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to rate, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next Lore Reloaded.